My parents took my college fund for my sister's apartment. Now, they wanted me to raise her abandoned kid. I'm 20. 2 years ago, I opened my email to find an acceptance letter from one of my dream colleges, complete with a scholarship offer. My hands were shaking as I read it over and over. All those late nights studying, the weekends spent working instead of hanging out with friends, the careful budgeting of every dollar I earned, it had finally paid off. "Honey, this is amazing," Mom exclaimed when I showed her the letter, her eyes scanning the scholarship details. "And with such a generous award, too. We're so proud of you." I'd been working part-time at a local coffee shop since I was 16, determined to build up a decent college fund. Every paycheck went straight into my mom's account since I was too young for my own. I never questioned this arrangement. I mean, why would I? She was my mom, and I trusted her completely. I just assumed she'd transfer everything back once I headed off to college. "Just think of all the extra things you can do with your savings now that tuition is covered," my best friend Sarah said when I told her about the scholarship. "Maybe study abroad or get a better laptop for classes." I had so many plans for that money, but they all came crashing down a few days later when my parents called me into the living room for what they called a family discussion. Dad cleared his throat, not quite meeting my eyes. "Since you got that scholarship, we've been thinking about your college fund. We want to use it to help your sister Caroline instead," Mom interrupted, her voice bright with forced cheerfulness. "You won't need it now that your tuition is covered, and she could really use the support." I sat there frozen, trying to process what I was hearing. The money I'd worked so hard for, every early morning shift, every weekend given up, every dollar carefully saved, was just being given away to my sister who'd never held down a job in her life. "But that's my money," I finally managed to say. "I earned it. How can you just—" "Now, honey," Mom cut in with that tone she always used when defending Caroline. "Family helps family, and your sister needs this right now." For some context, let me tell you about my older sister Caroline. She's the family troublemaker, while I'm the one who's always played by the rules and worked my butt off. The crazy thing is, she's only 3 years older than me, but you'd think she was still a little kid based on how my parents treat her. "Caroline's just sensitive," Mom would always say. "She needs extra support." Take what happened when Caroline was 14. She got caught bullying younger girls at school, not just once, but for weeks. It got so bad the school called my parents in for a meeting. I still remember sitting at the top of the stairs listening to the whole thing. "There must be some misunderstanding," Mom insisted, while Caroline put on the waterworks. My daughter would never do something like that. The teachers had multiple witnesses, but Mom wouldn't hear it. She actually accused victims of making it all up to get Caroline in trouble. Can you believe that? In the end, Caroline got a slap on the wrist, 1 week suspension, and learned that crying could get her out of anything. But things really went off the rails when she turned 16. Getting caught smoking at school would have been bad enough, but Caroline had to take it to the next level. She was dealing weed. The school had rock-solid evidence this time. Even my parents couldn't talk their way out of it. Did my parents finally let Caroline face consequences? Nope. Mom went straight into damage control mode. Instead of addressing the reality that her precious daughter was dealing drugs, she spun this whole story about sending Caroline to some fancy boarding school for better opportunities. You'd think getting expelled would be Caroline's rock bottom, right? A wake-up call to get her act together? Nope. A few months into her time at the fancy new school, my parents got a midnight phone call. Caroline had disappeared. She left behind one of her dramatic letters. "Mom and Dad, Nick is my soulmate. We're meant to be together forever. Don't try to stop us." The whole house went into panic mode. Mom was hysterical, Dad was calling the police, and I was thinking, here we go again. The cops found her a few days later at a friend's house, and when my parents went to bring her home, Caroline dropped her next bomb. "I'm marrying Nick," she announced. "You can't stop me. We're in love." Instead of putting their foot down, my parents actually negotiated with her. The deal? Caroline would finish high school, and then they'd support her marrying Nick right after graduation. They even promised to help them financially. True to form, the second Caroline graduated, she and Nick got married. And my parents? They didn't just help, they went all in. Found them an apartment, paid their rent, covered their bills. Nick's parents weren't in the picture, so my mom and dad took on everything. Meanwhile, I was working part-time, saving every penny for college, and watching my parents pour money into supporting my adult sister and her husband, who couldn't be bothered to support themselves. The favoritism was so blatant it made me sick. So when my parents decided to take my college fund, money I'd worked years to save, and use it to buy Caroline an apartment because she was pregnant, that was the last straw. "You can't just give away my money," I protested. "I earned that. But she's having a baby." Mom beamed, like that made everything okay. Dad was grinning ear to ear about becoming a grandfather, completely ignoring how upset I was. "She can barely take care of herself," I pointed out. "How is she going to handle a baby?" Mom waved off my concerns like always. "Nick just got a great new job. They'll be fine." Then came the kicker. They weren't just giving away my money, they were using it to buy Caroline and Nick a brand new apartment. Rent-free, of course. Another massive handout to make sure precious Caroline never had to face adult responsibilities. "This way they can focus on the baby," Mom explained, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Meanwhile, I was watching years of hard work vanish into thin air, sacrificed on the altar of enabling Caroline. When I left for college, Dad didn't even help me move. Thank God for my friends who stepped up with their parents' trucks and muscle power. As we packed up my room, I could hear Mom on the phone with Caroline, excitedly discussing nursery themes. I spent 2 peaceful years at college, building my own life, working part-time as a server to support myself since my savings were gone. I rarely went home. What was the point when my room was now a nursery? I'd only met my nephew Jimmy once, briefly, when he was born. Then this morning my phone rang. Mom was hysterical, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "Have you heard from Caroline?" she managed between sobs. "Please, it's important. We need you to come home right away." Turns out they'd found 2-year-old Jimmy on their doorstep this morning, with nothing but a small backpack and a note. Caroline and Nick had vanished. "You need to come home right away," Dad demanded when he got on the phone. "The family needs you now. This is an emergency." "I have exams this week," I replied firmly. "I can't just drop everything because Caroline messed up again." "This isn't about the past," Dad argued, his voice rising. "This is about family. Your nephew needs us." "Funny," I said, feeling years of resentment bubble up. "Where was this concern for family when you took my college fund? When you didn't even help me move? When you turned my room into a nursery before I was even gone? Now suddenly you need me?" The truth came out in pieces over the next few days. The note wasn't just about abandoning Jimmy. Caroline had specifically asked me to raise him, saying she wished she could be more like me, more responsible and capable. Turns out she and Nick had been heavy into drugs, regularly leaving Jimmy alone while they partied. My parents had hidden all this from me. "We think you should move back home," Dad suggested during another call. "Maybe take a break from college to raise Jimmy." I actually laughed out loud. "Are you serious? I'm not dropping out of college to fix Caroline's mess. We need to call CPs." "But she wanted you to take him," Mom protested. "She knows you'd be a good mother to him." "That's not my responsibility," I said firmly. "I'm sorry about Jimmy. I really am. But I won't derail my life because Caroline abandoned her kid." "How can you be so cold?" Mom cried. "This is your nephew we're talking about." "Yes, the nephew you bought an apartment for with my money," I reminded her. "The one you turned my room into a nursery for. The one whose mother you enabled until she literally abandoned him on your doorstep. This is the consequence of your choices, not mine." 2 months have passed since then. My parents have temporary custody of Jimmy while CPS handles everything. Caroline and Nick are still missing, though there have been reports of them using drugs in various cities. The apartment my parents bought them is empty except for empty bottles and evidence of their drug use. I'm back at college, focusing on my future. I visit Jimmy when I can. He's a sweet kid who deserves better than what his parents did to him. But I refuse to let my sister's bad choices derail my life, no matter how much my parents tried to guilt me into it. I'm done being the family safety net, but I'd be lying if I said it was easy. Last weekend, I went to visit Jimmy, bringing him a new toy truck I'd spotted in a store window that reminded me of one I had as a kid. "Andy!" he squealed when I walked in, running to hug my legs. "Look what I drew!" He proudly showed me a crayon drawing of what looked like 3 people. "That's you, and that's Grandma and Grandpa," he explained, pointing to each figure. "What about your mom and dad?" I asked gently, noticing they weren't in the picture. "They're on vacation," he said simply, already distracted by the new truck. My heart broke a little hearing him say that. It's what my parents told him to explain Caroline and Nick's absence. Later that night, Mom tried again to convince me to move back home. "He loves you so much," she said, gesturing toward Jimmy playing with his truck in the living room. "And we're not getting any younger." "Mom," I cut her off firmly. "I love Jimmy, but I'm not giving up my education. I'm not Caroline." "Why do you have to bring her up?" Mom snapped. "This isn't about Caroline." "Isn't it?" I challenged. "It's always about Caroline. My whole life has been about Caroline. What she needs, what she wants, how to protect her from consequences." "Well, I'm done. I'm building my own life now." "We just want what's best for everyone," Dad chimed in from his armchair. "No," I corrected him. "You want what's easiest? You want me to clean up Caroline's mess because I'm the responsible one. But I won't do it, not this time." I drove back to campus that night with tears in my eyes, questioning if I was doing the right thing. The truth is, I do feel guilty sometimes. Not about standing my ground, but about Jimmy. He's innocent in all this, caught in the middle of adult problems he can't understand. I send him birthday and Christmas presents, video chat when I can, try to be a stable presence in his life. But I won't sacrifice my future to become his mother. That role belongs to Caroline, whether she wants it or not. Last week, my parents got an email from Caroline, the first contact since she left. No apology, no explanation, just a demand for money, claiming she and Nick were ready to get clean if my parents would pay for rehab. Mom wanted to send it right away. "She's asking for help," Mom insisted during our weekly phone call. "We have to try." "Like you tried with the apartment?" I asked pointedly. "How'd that work out?" The silence on the other end spoke volumes. I knew they would probably send the money anyway. They always did. But I've learned my lesson about enabling Caroline, about sacrificing my own needs for someone who never thinks about anyone but herself. Looking back, losing my college fund was actually a wake-up call. It showed me exactly where I stood with my parents, and exactly what would happen if I kept putting my sister's needs before my own. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the most important ones. "You know what's funny?" I told Sarah yesterday over coffee. "If they'd let Caroline face consequences years ago, maybe she wouldn't have ended up like this. Maybe she'd actually be able to take care of her own kid." "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "But you can't change the past. You can only control what you do now." She's right. It's time to live my own life, finish my degree, and build a future on my own terms. Maybe someday my parents will understand why I couldn't sacrifice everything to clean up Caroline's mess. Until then, I'll keep moving forward, one day at a time. As for Jimmy, I'll be the best aunt I can be. I'll be there for holidays and birthdays, send him cards and gifts, and maybe someday, when he's older, I'll explain why things happened the way they did. But I won't let guilt or family obligation derail the life I'm building for myself. I learned that lesson from watching Caroline. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their own choices.